Last week we heard about Jesus teaching and healing a crowd of people. We also focused on his words to the newly called 12 regarding blessings and woes, Luke's version of the Beatitudes. Jesus wanting to make sure that the 12 newly called apostles, the disciples, understood the importance of the work that they were undertaking, the work for the realm of God. This morning we continue with the sermon, we continue with his teaching to those disciples, and of course people in the crowd would be hearing them on the Sermon on the Plain. Jesus is going along and detailing what this life of following him entails, what God requires. This morning's scripture text is under the heading of Love for Enemies, as Megan pointed out to the kids. Enemy is defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary as one that is antagonistic to another, especially one seeking to injure, overthrow, or confound an opponent. Opposing, disliking, conflicting, forceful, and often seeking to injure. And on the other side of that, we define love. Love is defined as a strong affection for another arising out of kinship or personal ties or common interest, an assurance of affection in the object of attachment, devotion, and admiration. So Cooper and Kerrigan, when your parents tell you that you have to love each other and cruise, this is the definition that they're going with. They might pull the dictionary out. Batman and the Joker, Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham, Harry Potter and Voldemort, the Avengers and Thanos. Raise of hands if you can't wait for the second Avenger movie to come out. I need more hands. Really? I need Kim and Lynn here. They always raise their hands to my movies. And your boys. The 101 Dalmatians and Cruella de Vil, Dorothy and the Wicked Witch of the West, James Bond and Blofeld, James Bond and Goldfinger, James Bond and Doctor Who, Sherlock Holmes and Professor Moriarty, enemies, adversaries. When we think about the movies and books that we love, we don't think about the protagonist and the one we deem as the enemy in terms of love. We usually think they'll kill that guy by the end of the movie, that person will be in jail, something will happen to them, but we generally don't think in terms of love. Yet in this morning's scripture, we have a call to love our enemies from Jesus. In verses 27 to 30 of Luke chapter 6, Jesus starts to outline an ethic of generosity for people living in a hostile first century world. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. In last week's scripture text, Jesus tells the 12 to not worry about those people who dislike them, when people hate them because of the work that they're doing for the realm of God. In fact, Jesus tells them that they will be blessed. And now Jesus is telling them not only will they not worry that people don't like them, but these same people who don't like them, who sometimes we deem as enemies, that these 12 should do good things for these people, that they should bless these people even when they curse them, that they should pray for them when they abuse them in any manner. Those generally aren't the first human reactions we have when people are mistreating us. And so we know this is a steep learning curve for the 12 newly called apostles and for ourselves. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also, and from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. A warning here. we do have to be careful with these verses. This isn't a call for abuse to occur. It isn't a call to abuse other people, not a call to take violence from others. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also, and from anyone who takes away your coat, do not even withhold your shirt. Give to anyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. This isn't a call to be victims or a doormat. This is Jesus telling those who are listening, especially the 12, because we have to remember last week we talked about him looking them straight in the eyes. So he's telling the 12 that they have to react differently. They have to try to push down that initial response we have as human beings, wanting to match blow for blow instead of reacting with grace and kindness. This is Jesus telling the disciples that their response to others is not based on that other person's behavior. That their response to others while following in the footsteps of Jesus will have to be diametrically opposed, oftentimes, to the way others treat them. In the last Sunday school class a few weeks ago, the youth actually focused on this topic. They had an object lesson where they had beach balls and they stood across from another person. And they had to hit or throw the beach ball, and the other person had to try to catch it and keep going back and forth. And if one person dropped it or didn't catch it, then the other person got a point. Well, as you can imagine, they're beach balls. And so if one person served it a little hard, the other person, I'll use Tori as an example. She's a volleyball player. If her brother hit it a bit hard to her, she said, and I quote, "I'm going to ram this down your throat, Logan." Which reminds me totally of me at that age with my 7 siblings. But that worked out perfectly. All the youth did it. It was interesting to watch because we do usually do the activity before we do the lesson. And so each one of them tried to outdo the other, or at least match blow for blow. I think Ashton thought he was playing volleyball with his sister. And then during the discussion, they admitted, all of them, to wanting retaliation. That if the other person hit it hard, they wanted to hit it just as hard, if not harder, because they wanted that point. And it set up our conversation perfectly about how Jesus often calls us to react differently than how other people treat us. It's a pretty deep discussion. And our new beanbag chairs up there. In verse 31, Jesus gives the golden rule: do to others as you would have them do to you. Do good to others even when they do bad to you. Notice he doesn't say, this will be easy, because he knows it's not going to be. Jesus knows what the initial reaction of human beings are when someone comes at us. So it's not going to be a cakewalk for the 12. He knows that. In verses 32 to 34, Jesus goes on to say, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. Jesus isn't saying not to love people who love you. As Megan pointed out to the kids, it's a lot easier to love people who love you. It's really easy to love your grandma. She gives you anything you want. I'm thinking about JC and Marvin and Jean. JC loves her grandparents. It's easy to love our grandparents, right? But it's a lot harder, as Megan pointed out, to love that kid at school who isn't nice to us. And Jesus isn't saying don't give to people who give to you, because because that's okay too. But what Jesus is saying to the 12 and to us is that we need to step outside of our comfort zone and to love people even when it may not be appreciated. I won't ask for a show of hands if you've ever loved someone and then felt like it wasn't appreciated, because I think we've all been there. We're called to love people even when they say terrible things to us, to give to those whom we don't expect anything in return, to be good and to do good everywhere. Jesus ends his instruction on loving enemies with verses 35 and 36. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. When you love even those who don't love you, when you love those who are your quote-unquote enemy, when you do good for them, when you lend to them, when you give what you can without expecting anything in return, then you will be behaving like the children of God, like you are made in the image of God. Susan E. Hyland writes in Feasting on the Word, when the teachings of the Sermon on the Plain are not grounded in the disciple's identity as God's child, they become a list of ethical demands that do not further justice and wholeness. When the disciple understands his or her actions are flowing out of God's abundance, to which he or she belongs and which belongs to him or her, turning the other cheek becomes an act of resistance to evil that has the power to transform the world. Luke then gives us a picture of God full of mercy and grace, for God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. How true that is, and how extremely grateful I am personally that that is the case. We are called to be merciful because our God is merciful, to be full of compassion and love. For first century Jews living under Roman occupation, though, this pronouncement from Jesus had to be disappointing. They were abused daily. They were oppressed, ruled, taken advantage of. Jesus was right there in the boat with them, being a first century Jew. So to hear Jesus talk about how God desires for the children of God to be merciful and full of love, even to the Roman occupiers, would have been mind-numbing at first. Even though his instruction is directed to the 12 apostles, directly looking them in the eyes, we know that the crowd there is listening. We can see them. And we have to wonder if anyone in the crowd at this point during the sermon thought this was too much for them. Was there anyone who said, I can't do that. I can't love the Romans. Do you know what they're doing to us? Did anyone walk away? I'd imagine that there were people often that walked away just like that. Be kind and giving and loving to the people who are taking their land, their money, and oftentimes their lives. These same people who Jesus knows will crucify him. Yet here he stands. Love your enemies. That would have been tough to wrap their minds around, and if we're being honest, it's often tough for us as well. But Jesus was and still is lifting up the standard of ethical love, agape love, giving without receiving, loving without requirement, loving because God loves us first, loving because our faith in God creates such acts of goodness that we give it out. This is radical stuff. For the time of the Sermon on the Plain and now, this is radical stuff. It's a teaching for the followers of Christ in an ever-present hostile world. Hostility of the world hasn't changed since the time of Jesus. Who's in power and how they oppress has been what's changed. And it makes us realize that justice and mercy have been and always will be in tension with one another. This morning's text is a call from Jesus to live in a way that is contrary to our human nature. And it's important to point that out, to recognize it, and to name it when it comes up. This is a new way of life. I mentioned the youth in our church earlier. And here's another concrete example from the eyes of youth as to why Jesus teaching about loving our enemies, loving the people we don't like, and people who don't like us is important. At the new age of 4, my niece Kinsley's favorite show is Paw Patrol. Show of hands if you watch Paw Patrol. I figured there are grandparents around, parents. I'm about to get real nerdy long, so stay with me. It's a cartoon about a group of dogs who each have a job in their own abilities to help rescue people and other animals. Chase is a police dog and a born leader. I have to point that out because my niece always says he's the leader. Marshall is a firefighter and a medic. Rubble works construction. Sky is a pilot. Rocky drives a recycling truck. Zuma, my favorite, drives a hovercraft and does water rescues. Everest helps with snow rescues. And Tracker does rescues in the jungle and has a pretty cool Jeep. The other day, while I was babysitting her, Kinsley and I were watching Paw Patrol and playing with all of her Paw Patrol toys that she got for her birthday. And one of the characters on the show, the villain type, the enemy type, his name is Mayor Humdinger. And I feel like that's quite a name. And she says it, and I'm always amazed. Mayor Humdinger was pretending to be hurt and was riding around on a power scooter with his leg up in a cast. And people were giving him things, or he was guilting people into giving him things. And if you've never watched it, Mayor Humdinger wears a top hat and a suit, full of himself. He's greedy. He sort of looks a bit like the Monopoly man. He likes to try to get ahead. He lies, he cheats, he steals. In this particular episode, he was being extremely rude to people who were giving him things or the people he was guilting into giving him things. And at one point, an old lady gave him a pie that he guilted her into giving him. And he looked at her after eating it and said, the pie would have been better had it been a different kind of pie. And he goes on behaving like this for a while. And my niece looks at me and says, he's naughty, ain't he, Haley? Why are people being nice to him? And I said something like, well, even when people aren't nice to us, we have to try to be nice to them. Because I have to remember that my sister will yell at me if I say certain things to my niece. So I have to edit things quite often. So, we have to be nice to people even when they aren't being nice to us. And then one of those moments appeared when it's very clear that the Spirit of God is present. And Kinsley responded, yeah, my teacher in church always tells us that Jesus wants us to be nice to people. Church works. At 4, she's learned through her children's church teachers to love her enemies, but she doesn't have any enemies because she's 4, and she doesn't think in those terms. There are people who don't like her because as long as she's playing and she's got toys, people like her. And as long as other people have toys and they're playing, she likes them. But at 4, her teachers are breaking it down in church for her to understand. Jesus wants you to be nice to people. Jesus wants us to be nice to people, wants us to give to people, wants us to treat people with love and compassion, even when it may be difficult to do so, even when they make it difficult to do so, because there are those folks. Love your enemy. A radical teaching by Jesus over 2,000 years ago stands today to give us hope and for us to be the hope. Love those enemies. And maybe we think we don't have any enemies. I hear, especially at funerals, when people say, oh, and they didn't have an enemy in the world. So maybe we don't think in terms like that, but there are generally people that we don't like, and there are people who don't like us. Love the people you can't stand. Love the people who can't stand you. Show others grace and mercy. Share the compassion of God with the world. The way we treat others should not be based on the way that they treat us. Instead, the way we treat others should be based on our love for God and God's love for us. And on the days that we struggle with this, because it is hard, remember that Jesus never told the 12 this would be easy, that it would never be a cakewalk, just that it's part of following his way, part of being a better version of ourselves, part of being the image of God. This ends this morning's word. Thanks be to God. And now you all know about Paul.